Hello, and welcome to the course of U.S. history. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time, we looked at the roots of American democracy by examining the royal governorships and how that had upended the American legislatures, the English Bill of Rights, and how William and Mary helped to somewhat right that. The anger created by the Navigation Acts and how England really starts to look at the colonies as a way to make money, and then some growing discontent within the colonies themselves. Today, we're going to be looking at what becomes an American way of life and how the American colonists start to distinguish themselves in a slightly different way than they start to look at themselves as Americans rather than just as Englishmen. One of the important ways that they do this is through social class. In Europe of that time, less so in England than the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe was really locked into this. Your social status was determined by the family you were born into. In order to be successful in life, to be wealthy, to have power, you had to have been born into the right family. If you weren't, good luck to you. It probably wasn't going to happen. An example of this, we can just look at the modern royal family tree in England and just look at number 17 down here. This is the 17th person on the rung of who will become the monarch of England. So this person is never going to become king. However, their life is going to be pretty well set up for them. Even today, back in the 1700s, that was even more so. They were lucky enough to have been born into the right family. Things were going to be good for them. In America, we didn't have nobility like that. And instead, your social status was determined largely by your wealth. It was how wealthy you were. And this could change. You could be born poor and become wealthy. You could be born wealthy and become poor. This man right here, John Hancock, is one of the wealthiest men in the colonies at the time, and therefore is very important. He actually gets to be the first person to sign that Declaration of Independence that we'll talk about sometime pretty soon here. Now, the colonists, this ability to move depending on your wealth, creates something called social mobility. You could be born at one level of society and rise or fall depending upon your own actions. Largely wealth, political service, public service was another way to do this. But you could be born in that middle class and do really well and rise up to an upper class, or do very poorly and fall to a lower class. This was something that did not typically happen within European societies. Another thing that comes into American consciousness, even as it's passing somewhat through England, are the beliefs and the philosophies popularized by John Locke. John Locke lived in the late 1600s and came up with this idea of a social contract theory. And it's going to be a theory for a long time until Americans decide, hey, this should just be how we run our government. And that idea being that the people are in charge. We, the people, that is where the real power within a society exists. But there are so many people that it cannot be held effectively by all of them. So they willingly transfer their power to a government. They transfer their power to the government. In exchange for receiving that power, the government then agrees to protect and serve the people. So the people transfer their power to the government in exchange for, as Locke would say, the government's sole purpose was the protection of people's life, liberty, and property. That is why government exists, so people can live free and prosperous lives. And Locke would go further with these ideas to suggest that governments that fail to protect those natural rights should be replaced. That a government that does not protect life, does not protect liberty, does not protect property is a government that should not exist. Thomas Jefferson is going to be reading an awful lot of John Locke when he creates the Declaration of Independence, and borrows very heavily from these ideas and even somewhat from these very words. Now, another thing that the colonies really have going for them is a culture of reading. The colonists were the most literate people in the world in the mid-1700s. The colonists read, and they read a lot. Americans had a large number of newspapers. Newspapers existed in tremendous numbers in the American colonies, and libraries also existed in all major cities. So colonists had this regular access to books and newspapers, and of particular interest to them was current events. American readers loved to read that newspaper, pick up on the current events, and then get together in groups and discuss politics, to discuss how that country was functioning, how their leaders were doing, and whether or not they could do anything about it. Americans were literate and very politically active for this time in world history. Now, one of the individuals who's both an example of this and somebody who helps to cause this is Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is an incredibly important American, and at the time, the mid-1700s, he is the most famous American in the world. Everybody knows who Benjamin Franklin is. Throughout Europe, Benjamin Franklin is a known individual for the work that he has done. Some of the things that he's done. He was an author. He created, among other things, Poor Richard's Almanac, a collection of essays about life. The phrase "early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise" was one of Ben Franklin's ideas put into this book, which he himself was able to create because Benjamin Franklin was a printer. He owned a print shop in Philadelphia and would create a lot of his own books and also publish for others as well. He was an inventor, did a number of things. One of his more famous is the kite and key experiment where he showed that electricity could be conducted. He also created bifocals. This is the idea that you could have one pair of glasses that would help you both see things that were far away and help you read books that are up close. And a lot of other inventions too, but I can't list them all. He was a philosopher and a politician. He was an ambassador. He read, he wrote, he led in a number of instances. He really did a lot of cool things. He also, I'm going to keep going here on Ben Franklin here for a while because he's just awesome. He also creates the first public library. He was very important in the ideas around this and then the action to create a public library in Philadelphia, the Library Company of Philadelphia, so that people in Philadelphia could be well read and that they could understand literature and culture from around the world. And then he also helped devise a postal system so that people could send letters from one to another instead of personally delivering those correspondence or knowing somebody. It's like, oh, you're traveling up to Boston next week. Can I pass you this letter and can you pass it to a friend of mine? That was how mail was moving about the colonies. But Ben Franklin said that's ridiculous. There's a better way, and helped create a postal system, one that will eventually be adopted into the American Postal Service that we have today. So Ben Franklin was responsible for that. And he's going to do a whole lot more. We'll be circling back to Ben Franklin a few more times. But he was an outstanding individual. And he served as an example to the world and an example to other Americans of what the American potential was. Ben Franklin was not born wealthy, but rose to be the most important person in the American colonies. Benjamin Franklin, you the man. Next time, we're going to be looking at the French and Indian War, a conflict that's going to erupt in the colonies between the colonists and England against the French and their Native American allies. In that lesson, we'll be looking at the causes, some of the key actions, and then the outcomes of this French and Indian War. So please do make sure to join me then. Thank you for joining me today for the course of U.S. history, and farewell.